GALP
おい大地、ブッシュヒルゴルフパークで会おう。最寄りの駅は地下鉄ビクトリア線のコックフォスターズだよ。ブッシュロード、コックフォスターズ？マジで？そんな場所本当にあんの？からかわれてる？絶対からかわれてるよな。もうネットで調べたいのに、ロンドンマジで Wi-Fi 全然ないんだけど、どうなってんの？海外旅行や出張の準備は万全ですか？次回日本を離れる際はグローバル Wi-Fi で安心。イギリスやアメリカを含む200以上の国と地域で Wi-Fi が利用可能。全国39カ所、そして20の空港で便利な受け取りサービスをご用意。さらに128の国と地域で無制限プランも。お得な価格で快適なインターネットを。今すぐタウン Wi-Fi.com にアクセスし、クーポンコード GAL を入力して 10% 割引をゲットしましょう。この番組はグランドスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
A lot has been going on in the UK, especially with the Online Safety Act, a bill that's designed to safeguard children from inappropriate content online. And it's brought up a lot of concerns and conversation within my niche gaming community and from people all over the world speaking up. I don't want to get political on this podcast, that's not really the point. But today I'm going to cover a bit more quote-unquote controversial topics, especially this one, of sexualization in video games. Before we get into it, please be sure to share this podcast around on all platforms. Give us a 5-star review. I'm not here to beg for likes, but that's how engagement works, and these ratings help us grow. Also, maybe consider supporting us by checking out our sponsors in the links in the description. The attitude towards sexualization in games have changed over the years. People's values change, and honestly, I'm glad that certain changes have been made. We're seeing way more characters that have real meaning in the story rather than just purely being there for fan service or for ships. We saw a shift over the years from Western developers and some communities stating woke designs, etc. I'm not really here to comment about that, just giving you guys a bit of backstory. Of course, what affects my community the most was some censorship imposed by Sony a few years back, which led to cancellation of some projects, including Senran Kagura 7, and the shift in genre of games like studios like Marvelous develop and publish. And when the community tries to express their disdain for censorship, they get stopped and they get slapped with the pervert label, which I kind of think is very unfair. Yes, Senran's fan servicey elements may be considered its main appeal, but there's definitely more to the game than that. Especially for those who are a fan of hack and slash games, Senran brought a lot to the table. Stuff we haven't seen in hack and slash games since Dynasty Warriors Strike Force back in 2009, a game that many people may have not even played even. For example, the ability to transform your characters was not really truly present in hack and slash before Senran. You had it in Strike Force, but like I said, not many people played Strike Force. As well as the verticality in hack and slash games, the ability to run on rooftops and do air combos. Honestly, I think the team at Marvelous were heavily inspired by Dynasty Warriors Strike Force, but we might save that for a future podcast episode. I'm working on an episode called Dynasty Warriors, the daddy of hack and slash. So be sure to stick around for that. It also introduced gacha mechanics into hack and slash, which is very interesting implementation and something which I don't think even Koei has used in games. Well, to be fair, they might have been using it in Warriors Abyss to a lesser extent, but in terms of mainline titles, they don't really use it. And that's in itself a little bit controversial because some people don't even want gacha in a hack and slash. But back to the topic on hand. I don't see an issue with fan service in games and anime even, as long as it's fair fan service. And that kind of depends on the type of game, For example, DOA, Dead or Alive series, is well known for over-sexualization of its characters, especially the female roster. However, in recent years, we're seeing more sexualization of the male characters as well. Of course, Dead or Alive 6 was a bit of a flop, in all honesty, but tried to tone down the sexualization a bit, presumably after articles had been focusing on DOA Extreme 3's VR features. In fact, Koei Tecmo had mentioned to me directly that this was the main reason why we never saw a release outside of Asia, but yet the Asia release had English translation, which is normal for Asian releases outside of Japan, but this game was actually being localized for the Western market as well. But that was just axed because of this BBC article, I think, that came out that was calling out this particular feature in the game. So we determined that the English-speaking countries do not want sexualized content in their games, and that's fine. But I still think there is space for these games in today's landscape. I've played a lot of games that are quite questionable at first, but then they end up being my favorite games of all time, purely for its great story and character development. Let's use Criminal Girls as an example. I've been kicked off a train. I've mentioned this so many times. I've been kicked off a train for playing this game in public. Now, it has some very questionable mechanics, but if this game never released overseas due to censorship, then I don't think there would be a place for this type of game at all, which is a shame because the story made me cry, and rarely games make me do that. Are some parts of the games questionable? Yes, but I don't think it has stopped gamers before when playing games that depict extreme violence or sexual content like Grand Theft Auto, or in fact Modern Warfare 2. That game literally had to add a skip feature on the No Russian mission. I don't know if you guys remember that. They didn't remove the mission. You weren't able to get any achievements on that mission, and in essence, it's there for story purposes, but you could skip it. So technically, did it need to be there? That's an argument that could be made. Even in the remastered version of Modern Warfare 2, they kept that scene where you can shoot civilians in an airport. But I guess that's okay as long as it's not anime girls, right? That was sarcasm, by the way, in case you guys didn't realize that. It seems quite odd that Japanese games get this sort of bad publicity when it comes to sexualization, and other games get a pass. For example, characters in Overwatch were incredibly hypersexualized. You know, in a game wearing revealing and skin-tight outfits, there was an incredible amount of Rule 34 content for that game, and one can argue that's kind of what made the game thrive for a bit. It's the same sort of thing with Marvel Rivals. I know Marvel Rivals has a Chinese developer, and I think it has something to do with Tencent and things like that, but Marvel Rivals is another game in which it's incredibly hypersexualized. But I kind of think we give it a pass as well. We just let it slide because everyone's into it. And there's a lot of mods that are going on, nude mods and a lot of Rule 34. And that's sort of keeping that game alive. There are people that actually do play it. But then there's also people that play it because, you know, they want that sort of content in their game. And a lot of people online also call it a Guna game, you know, for having character skins that are sexualized, especially character skins that are made by the developers themselves, right? If we look at characters like Psylocke or the Invisible Woman from Fantastic Four or Emma Frost, etc. Or even Venom, okay? Can we also go on a bit of a tangent for a moment? Does anyone hate the term Guna? I hate it so much. Like, it sounds gross. Like, people are acting so goofy with that word and they're like, oh yeah, I'm a gooner. And I hate it so much. It's basically the word wanker, but if you called someone a wanker, it's an insult, right? It can be used in a silly way, and it can be used in a bit of an endearing way where you call someone a silly wanker, you know what I mean? But like, I don't know, to call someone a gooner and that person almost uses it as a badge of honor, it's so weird. Like, do people have no shame? Anyway, that's another tangent in this one episode. You are on a roll, bish. Back on topic. These games get a pass, but people call for censorship with games like Senran, or even Onichambara, or even games like Stellar Blade. Here's my thoughts on Stellar Blade. It's okay. I should have reviewed this game like a year ago when it was released. It's okay. The environment and the combat is great for me. I like it. It's not too difficult, but it can be incredibly repetitive at times, like so boring, because it's a very lonely experience with the lack of humans outside of the main base. But, you know, the costumes are great, and I can't deny Shift Up put an incredible amount of detail into character models, especially in the faces, but also the bodies, right? And I had a lot of people sort of commenting that had issues with sexualization in this game particularly. But like all of the games I've mentioned today, it's not the main purpose of the game. I think in the case of Stellar Blade, it's heavily emphasized. And honestly, I think the main reason why people purchased this game on PC was to install mods, especially certain mods. But that's what I want to mention, really. These are not pornographic games. They are rated accordingly by the ESRB and the PEGI systems, and I don't think it needs further censorship by publishers or console manufacturers by Sony. I don't think self-censorship needs to occur. If it's something that the ESRB and the PEGI system says, hey, we will give you a higher rating for this game, then yeah, maybe you might need to remove that. For example, we had Marvelous on a few years back during COVID, where we were talking about Story of Seasons and the possibility that there would have been a Senran crossover. The reason being was because they had included horse racing and subsequently gambling mechanics in Story of Seasons, I think Friends of Mineral Town, which was the remake of the original Story of Seasons game. Now, if that had occurred, that would have bumped up the game to PEGI 16 as opposed to like PEGI 3 or whatever it was, because of that gambling mechanic. I think it might have been overviewed, but because of that one mechanic. And they said, well, if we had that mechanic in, we would have included Senran characters as, you know, NPCs or have costume crossovers and things like that. You know, they were going to include that. So instead, you know, they didn't do that because PEGI didn't even do that. It might have been the case that they would remove that content. So they have multiple choices, right? They can either stick with that higher rating or decide to self-censor and remove that content. In this case, I'm guessing that would have been a bit of an issue to remove the horse racing mechanic because it is a sort of big event in the game. So they decided to keep that in. But, you know, as a joke, they would have included Senran characters, which I think is kind of funny. Other companies, because of these PEGI ratings, would have decided to remove elements or self-censor. And I think in those cases, if you want to target a particular type of customer or a particular type of market, then yes, it does make sense to do that. But if you know your game is a Senran Kagura game, what is the point? If, like, for example, with Senran, we got PBS and we got all of these other games that are kind of fan service games. PBS is a fan service game. And then you look at a game like Burst Renewal. There is no transformations in Burst Renewal. There is no gacha, panty gacha. There's none of the elements that sort of made Senran what it was. There's no elements within Burst Renewal that made me think, oh wow, this is a Senran game. This could be a basic hack and slash game. The game mechanics were there, but the personality of Senran Kagura had been removed from that game. Yes, the characters are there, but you know, there is no transformation, no shinobi transformations, which even then, that's a core game mechanic. That's something that gives you buffs, you know, and additional moves and even, you know, attack buffs and higher paced, etc. So it's like even the speed of the attacks are increased. So taking that core mechanic out, you know, it doesn't make sense. Like, okay, even within Estival Versus and Shinobi Versus, you can remove the Shinobi transformation scene. There is an option in the game. When you go into options, you can skip Shinobi transformation scene so that when you do the transformations, you don't get to see that scene. The transformation still occurs. And on top of that, you can customize the clothing for the transformation. So it's based on the player. It's up to the player to decide. If the player doesn't want the characters to be in bikinis, they can change that in game. They could change it so that, you know, your Shinobi transformation is fully clothed. Or you can change it so that they're dressed up as another character, which I always kind of thought was fun. That's what I used to do. So there are elements there within the game that allows the players to change it as opposed to them removing it. In a similar fashion with Modern Warfare 2, right? They made that decision for the players. If the players didn't want to play No Russian, they could skip it. If the players wanted to play No Russian, then they could play No Russian. Like, it's that sort of thing. I'm not here to compare No Russian with Senran, and I don't think anyone's ever made that comparison before, but it is there to kind of take into consider. These sort of things and this sort of self-censorship doesn't help anyone. It doesn't even help the industry. What do I mean by this? If Shift Up didn't make a game like Nikkei, Goddess of Victory, or Nike, how do you pronounce it? Is it Nikkei? I don't know. Do you think they would have had the experience or even a team large enough to create a game like Stellar Blade to the point where Sony came out and said, hey, we are publishing this game. This is considered a first party title and an exclusive for Sony, you know? Probably not. If Koei didn't create Otome games with the Review Party or Galge or even Eroge, bear in mind, Koei is well known actually for introducing these game genres. They've created the first Otome game, they created the first GALP, and even the first eroge. Would they have been big as they are today? Koei wouldn't, but I think these genres wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for companies like Koei, because they put heavy investment into, at least early on, heavy investment into those genres. That's sort of the third tangent of this episode, but actually that is a true thing about Koei. They invented the first eroge game, as well as the first GALP and the first Otome game, and helped to popularize those genres. I think I can kind of maybe end the episode with a few parting thoughts. Game developers should be making whatever games they want, so long as it's within legal boundaries, right? If they want to make sexualized games, they're more than free to. Our global rating systems are in place to prevent children from purchasing these games that are deemed inappropriate for those age groups, right? But apart from that, if you are of the age for these games, right? If you're over 18, who are these games harming? Is Stellar Blade harming anyone? Is Dead or Alive harming anyone? Even is Tekken and Street Fighter harming anyone? In my opinion, it isn't harming a lot of people. Is it promoting potentially harmful body images that's unrealistic to people? Yes, that is true. But the same argument can be made with fashion modeling or magazines or even pornography. So it doesn't feel like that's actually the issue with all of this, right? We sort of pick and choose what's okay, and it's kind of very inconsistent. We are okay with sexualization in more mainstream games, even ones from Japanese developers like in Square Enix, right? With Final Fantasy VII, or Capcom with, I can't remember what that game was. It was Resident Evil Village, and they had that sort of 7-foot tall lady, and everyone was like, oh yeah, mommy. No. Okay, we're okay with that, and we're okay with Street Fighter and Chun-Li's thighs. Right? We're okay with that. We make memes about it. We joke about it. We allow it. But we press hard on some developers where projects get cancelled due to heavy censorship, like Senran Kagura 7, like Dead or Alive Paradise 3, or even Escape from Asura, aka Criminal Girls X, a game that had to be renamed to distance itself from Criminal Girls and is in development limbo at the moment. That game was announced 5 years ago during COVID and still has no release date. I really and truly do not care about this topic. The only reason I made this episode was because I saw how it affected people within my podcast community, many of which play these games. I hate games getting cancelled due to reasons as silly as censorship, when other titles, bigger titles, get that pass because they're being published by Sony or being published by Square Enix or even Bandai Namco. Hell, a game like Samurai Maiden got a pass with censors, and Onechambara. If we're going to be comparing Onechambara to Senran, they pretty much have the same mechanics. But those games got a pass because, it was technically being published by a subsidiary of Bandai, known as D3 Publisher, the biggest entertainment company in the world. So I guess Sony can kind of give them a pass, especially with Onechambara and Samurai Maidens, but they won't give Marvelous a pass with Senran. And that kind of opens a even bigger can of worms, because how do we know that it's actually Sony imposing these censorship rules? Because a lot of people are blaming Sony for Senran, but maybe it's Marvelous themselves. Maybe it's the Marvelous Europe and Marvelous America that's actually saying back to their Japanese counterparts, saying these games won't work overseas for X, Y, and Z, and let's sort of damage the reputation of those games overseas. For example, Katagawa Jet Girls, that game, I'm convinced that game barely got a release in Europe, and it was a great game, and it kind of got overlooked, right? There should have been more marketing surrounding it, especially that there was an anime. They could have done stuff with Crunchyroll. Any sort of gaming company that has anime releases and things like that has collaborations with Crunchyroll and with other companies like that as well. So I don't understand why they didn't make the effort to do so. There is a kind of conspiracy theory going around that they did that on purpose to make the game tank. Oh, and that's another thing. We get games like the Like a Dragon series where you can literally go to cabaret clubs, go to hostess bars, live streams, and a lot of sexualized content within that game as well. But we've kind of let it slide because it's almost like part of the game series. We allow it. So, and that's Sega, right? So I don't know if there's really a pick and choose here, or really what is the main sort of case behind Senran. I think for me, it's kind of like Senran that's kind of been the driving force of this episode almost, but Yeah. That being said, that's this episode of GALP. Let me know what you think. If you disagree, let me know. If you agree, also let me know on Blue Sky and on X at GALP Podcasts. Okay. See you guys next week.